Hey y'all, welcome back to the Literary Apothecary, and if you're new here, welcome to the Literary Apothecary. Now, I just ask for your patience with me on this video because this is only my second video back after being off for several months, and I'm still trying to get the groove of things. The first video was a little rough, but it was fun to do. So in today's video, I've got a theme going on. I'm going to talk about two different books. It's a duo review of Books of the 45. So we're talking about Damn Rebel Bitches, The Women of the 45, and Bare-Arsed Banditi's The Men of the 45, both books written by Maggie Craig. These books were gifted to me by Kate, and Kate, I would just want to say thank you so much for giving to me. I enjoyed that ride so much. I love those books, and I will hold on to them forever. These books are historical nonfiction books, and they're kind of like the color commentary of this genre. They weren't boring or dry like history books sometimes can be. The 45 that these books goes into a lot of detail about, if you don't know what it is, was the Jacobite Uprising in 1745 to 46. Scottish, mostly but not all Highlanders versus the British Redcoats. The uprising culminated in the deadly and devastating Battle of Culloden. I first learned about the 45 uprising when I was reading Outlander. Of course, that takes place. The first two books take place essentially during the uprising. And we really get into some of the main characters of the uprising. In these two books, we learn about some of the other characters that you don't often see in history. So some things that I loved about both of these books, it gives us a look at other people involved in the historic uprising and not just the famous people like I mentioned, not just Bonnie Prince Charlie or Flora MacDonald. It gives you some of the other people that were involved in the 45 because there were a lot of people in the 45 and there was a lot of people lost, a lot of lives lost in that on both sides. Another thing that I loved about both of these books was that Craig takes from historical sources. She uses original documents, letters, newspapers, journals, stories, and writes them in her own voice to give it even more personality. I loved that it felt inspiring and full of hope, even though it was a devastating moment for the Scottish Highlanders. After the Battle of Culloden, the British, captured anyone they could find that was even suspected of being a Jacobite or supporting the Jacobites. They erased the Highlander Jacobite culture as a whole. They forbid Gaelic to be spoken. They forbid tartan to be worn, and they made it crimes to do these things and completely erased the culture. Now it's coming back. I think it's kind of fully back now, but it took decades and decades and decades, maybe even hundreds of years. I'm not a historian in this, so I don't know how long it took for it to start coming back again, but it took I'd say at least 100 years for it to fully come back again, and maybe even longer. I diverged though. Other things that I loved about both of these books, I appreciated that Craig included both sides, especially in the Men of the 45 book. We got men, obviously Jacobite men, but we also got men from the Redcoat side. Some were Scottish men and some were the British men, and I appreciated the balance of that because especially in such a passionate and strong felt subject as the 45 and Culloden, the narratives often lend either in one way or the other and don't have both sides in one book. So I really appreciated that. It was deeply and thoughtfully researched. And another thing that I loved, the last thing that I loved about both of these books was that it covered the whole uprising from start to finish and not just Culloden. When oftentimes people who aren't historians that studied this a lot talk about the 45 uprising, they focus just on the final Battle of Culloden, which in its own right is very historic and very important, especially to the uprising, because it ended the uprising. But the uprising was so much more than just the Battle of Culloden. That's just where it ended. What about all of this stuff that happened before? And really all the stuff that happened after, the stuff that the British did to the Jacobites, that is all part of this whole story. And I appreciated that Maggie Craig brought in the whole story of the 45 and not just Culloden. Now, some things that I didn't like, or, maybe was kind of knocked it down for me from being complete 5 stars all the way around. My copy of Damn Rebel Bitches, which is the Women of the 45 book, was missing several chapters, or at least one chapter. It went from page 48 to 65, which I know is like just a printing error, but it makes me wonder, what did I miss in those pages that I didn't have? At first I didn't notice it, and then I started looking at the top and I'm like, wait a minute, this is a whole different chapter. Why am I missing all of this material in between? It makes me wonder, what were the women that were discussed and written about in those chapters that were now lost in a book that is supposed to capture about the women that were lost? So that really threw me for a wrinkle. And then both books, but especially the Women of the 45, felt a bit repetitive at times. There's only so much you can say, and there's only so many different connections that you can make with something like the 45 Uprising, and it felt like a little bit at times Maggie Craig was kind of spinning her wheels a bit. However, I still truly enjoyed these books. Damn Rebel Bitches, I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and Bare-Arsed Banditi, I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. I have one quote for you that really stood out to me. Now, this is from Damn Rebel Bitches, and the quote says, "The professor believed that people were not subjects, but citizens, and that a citizen under a tyrannical government should not only be expected to rebel, it was his duty to do so." It was an idea which was later to find a huge resonance in the American colonies, and that just circles it back around for me, because reading about the 45 Uprising was so reminiscent of reading about the American Revolution, partly because there's the same ideals, but also I've learned in reading about the 45 and what happened to the Jacobites. Some went to the U.S., America then, and there's a lot of Scottish history in the history of the United States, and they were a big part of our American Revolution here. A lot of the Highlanders found home in North Carolina, which is where I live now, especially in the mountains, because it felt so much like home to them. So it kind of brought it full circle for me that the 45 Uprising was very reminiscent in its ideals as the American Revolution. However, as we know from history, the American Revolution was successful in a sense, and it kind of, with today's American politics, comes kind of even more full circle in that we're kind of facing similar situations here, except for within. So that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't like to go into politics here on this channel. But that quote just really came full circle in a number of ways for me. So that's my duo review for Damn Rebel Bitches and Bare-Arsed Banditi, The Women and the Men of the 45 by Maggie Craig. If you've read one or both of these books before, let me know in the comments below. What did you think of it? If you didn't read these books before, let me know, what did you learn from this video, and are you interested in reading these books now? As always, keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.